Hello everyone. In this lecture, I'm going to show you some best source method study designs and the steps you should follow in general for a typical best source method study. So here, first, let's look into a best source method study where we only look into criteria. So it's a study design with criteria only. So for example, here, this study could be that we want to assess the adaptation of blockchain technology. And here, based on literature review or based on an interview with experts, we found that there are 5 main criteria for adaptation. One criteria is pressure, another one is drivers, another one could be organizational barriers, supply chain related barriers, and technological barriers. So this could be the five criteria. Okay. And if you want to follow a study design with these 5 criteria, you can simply pick the Excel sheet with C5 on the best source method template Excel solver template provided by Professor Razai. Okay, so you can just use that. Yeah, you can proceed with the study. So in this study, we don't have any alternatives. We don't have any sub-criteria. We have only criteria. Okay. And I'm going to also show you how the study design can evolve with sub-criteria and criteria using the same example. But some studies may have only criteria, some would have criteria and sub-criteria, not any alternatives. Some studies might have criteria, sub-criteria, and alternatives, all of it, right? And for the later, the survey will be very long. For this study, with only criteria, 5 criteria, the survey is going to be decent length. Okay, it will be easier for the respondents to fill the survey. So now let's have a look into a best source method study with criteria and sub-criteria. So here you see we are still assessing blockchain adaptation technology. And here we have the criteria: pressure, driver, organizational barrier, supply chain barriers, and technological barriers. But each of these criteria has 3 sub-criteria: C1, C2, C3. And here you see we have the C1 to 3. What they mean, you can see it here, down here, right? You can see it down here. See what the C1 means, C2 means, C3 mean. Then here we have C4, C5, C6. They are here, C4, C5, C6, and so on, right? So normally you will come up with this criteria and sub-criteria again based on literature review or interview with the experts, right? Great. And for only a study with criteria and sub-criteria or only criteria, you would have these steps. Typically these 5 steps. Okay, so the step 1 will be identification of the criteria and sub-criteria. So this figure we have made, where does this criteria and sub-criteria come from? You have to identify them, right? And then when you identify them, normally one of the steps is that what is the best criteria for each of the parts and what is the worst criterion for each of the parts. Okay, so you have to ask the interviewer this question, and we have covered it in the examples, right? And then in the step 3, you normally ask the preference of the best criterion over all the criteria. Okay, so when we find the best criteria, then how important is the best criteria from all other criteria? Normally we use this scale of 1 to 9, where 1 means equally important and 9 means absolutely more important. The best criteria is absolutely more important than this criteria, that criteria, and so on, right? Then the step 4 is that find the preference of all other criteria over the worst criterion. So when we find the worst criterion, then we ask, okay, criteria 1, how important it is from the worst criteria. Criteria 2, how important it is from the worst criteria. Criteria 3, how important it is from the worst criteria, and so on. Okay, so we compare the all criteria from the worst criteria. And here in the step 3, when we compare the best criteria from all other criteria, this part will form the best to others vector. Okay, something we report in the paper. And then in the step 4, when we compare the all other criteria from the worst criteria, this part will give us the data for others to worst vector, okay, which we also report in the papers. And then in the end, we will use the solver and we will get the optimal weights, okay, for all the criteria and sub-criteria. Okay, so that's the idea here. But now let's have a look on a study design where we have the criteria, sub-criteria, and alternatives. Okay, so here we introduced 4 alternatives: single use, localization, substitution, and transformation. So what we're trying to see, considering all these criteria and sub-criteria, which blockchain adaptation strategy should we follow? And we consider 4 strategies, and out of these 4, which one should we go for? So that's the study design. Okay, and in this case you will have some more extra steps. Okay, so first of all, you will identify the criteria and sub-criteria, find the best and worst one, find the preference of the best over all other criteria, find the preference of the worst over all other criteria, and then you estimate the optimal weights. Fantastic. But now you should normally have a little bit more data that you collect from your survey, where you ask the respondents to rate each of the 4 alternatives under all the criteria. Okay, for example, in this study we have 15 criteria and we have 4 alternatives. So each of the respondents, they will rate, okay, under criteria 1, how likely we should go for the single use, how likely we should go for the localization or transformation or substitution. So we rated. Under criteria 2, how likely we are to go for one of these strategies. Under criteria 3, so on. Okay, so we will have a rating, extra rating. Okay, and normally that extra rating, we will multiply that rating with optimal weights, and then we get the final score for the alternatives. So that's one extra step when we have the alternatives. But there could be that you do not have any alternatives in your study design. Okay, so you have to first decide whether you want to have alternatives, or is it your goal of the study to have some alternatives and find the best alternative, or you just want to assess some criteria, evaluate some risk assessment criteria, or some adoption criteria, some barriers, or things like that. So then you may not have any alternatives. Okay, so thank you for listening to this. I hope you find it useful. If you have any queries, feel free to reach me.